Hello, I'm Kim Dittis, and I'm a medical oncologist, and I treat individuals who have breast cancer. I happen to have had breast cancer myself, and I have a background in nutrition, and I love talking about food. And I'll be doing this presentation with Eugenie Doyle.
I'm Eugenie Doyle, and I am a 42-year farmer. First conventional dairy, and then for the past 25 years, organic vegetables, small fruits, and hay. I'm also a yoga practitioner and teacher. And when I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2007, I was enormously helped by learning about Ayurveda, which is the sister science to yoga, an ancient system of understanding that food is medicine and that we're all healthier if we eat what suits our individual constitutions and the seasons.
So today, in particular, we're going to talk about food choices and healing yourself as well as healing the planet. So I want to start by talking about what the current situation is. So right now, 6 out of 10 individuals in the United States have at least one chronic disease. Almost half of the United States population has prediabetes or diabetes. Cardiovascular disease affects over half of the US population as well, causing over 2,000 deaths each day. 3 in 4 adults are overweight or obese. And so when you look at that whole situation in totality, really there are more Americans that are sick than are healthy right now. And this is just an example of how this has occurred over just the last 20 years. So what these heat maps explain is the incidence of obesity on the top and diabetes on the bottom that was present in 1994, 2000, and 2014. So from 1994 to 2014, just over 20 years, in 1994, there were 2 states that had an incidence of obesity over 14%. But currently, there are 43 states with an obesity level of greater than 26%, and as represented in the red states. Similarly, for diabetes, in 1994, 1 state had an incidence of 5% of diabetes. Now all 50 states have that incidence, and 25 have an incidence of diabetes of 9% or greater. So this is something that has really happened in the last several decades. So what's the problem? The problem has a lot to do with the food that we're consuming and the food system that supports it. So this is an example of the standard American diet, or the SAD diet. In the SAD diet, 63% of the food that we consume is processed. And some of that is processed plant food, some of that is processed animal food, and really only 6% represents whole plant food. So that's definitely a shift from the diet that we used to consume.
Also to blame is the current food and agriculture system. We have a food industry that pays no attention to health and treated by a health industry that pays no attention to food, according to farmer and writer Wendell Berry.
So I think it would be helpful to start with a couple of definitions. And the type of food that we're most concerned about is ultra-processed food. And so that's represented by the cereal on the right. So unprocessed food are foods in their whole state, but there's some processing that makes a whole lot of sense, like freezing and canning and trimming, and that's considered processing, but that's not where the concern is. The concern is with ultra-processed food that generally contains few nutrients and fiber and is mostly composed of corn, soy, or wheat with added fats, and are usually those foods that you find in packages. And I like these definitions of ultra-processed food. Michael Pollan calls it an edible food-like substance, which makes a lot of sense to me. And a little bit even more negative is Mark Bittman's definition of a substance capable of causing illness or death. So I've thrown in a little quiz here. So this is the food label for a food with all of those ingredients listed there, starting with enriched bleached white flour, and you can see all of the different non-food items that are included there, and also it are the nutrition facts. And so what this food actually is are Twinkies. And so you can tell by looking at the nutrition facts that the nutritional value is really questionable. There's carbohydrates, fat, and a bit of protein. Vitamins and minerals, you can see there, are really scarce. And phytonutrients are essentially absent. And phytonutrients are those compounds that are really beneficial for maintaining our health. And they're the compounds that people talk about in terms of preventing cancer. And that's where so much of health benefit lies. And that's a component of food that is frequently forgotten and non-existent in these Twinkies.
So what is a food system that we're all part of? At the simplest level, a food system involves everyone with each individual controlling and benefiting from each piece of this pie: production, processing, distribution, and consumption. Ideally, everybody would at least understand each of those areas. What we have is something more complex. It's hard to even figure out what it is. It certainly involves more than individuals producing their own food or even understanding where it comes from in a global economy.
So let's start talking about some of the consequences of this food system, both on human health and the planet. So I'm going to talk about some of the human health consequences. It comes as no surprise that a ultra-processed diet is going to contribute to chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. But it's also associated with several types of cancer, GI cancers in particular. And some new things that are turning up are things like non-alcoholic steatosis or fatty liver. And fatty liver used to be something that was associated with excess alcohol consumption, but it turns out that the metabolic syndrome associated with a diet really focused on ultra-processed food does the same thing. And then there's the damage to the gut microbiome that happens with the processed foods that we eat. And we're just now starting to understand how important the gut microbiome is to our health. And loss of the gut microbiome diversity can even be considered as an extinction event because we're losing those that bacteria in our gut that helps to make us healthy, sorry. And then there's some associations with mental health challenges, also likely related to the gut microbiome. And interestingly, Ayurvedic medicine has been emphasizing this relationship between the gut and the brain for centuries. And so I think we're just now catching up with this important information. And then on top of all of that, there are unsafe working conditions for food service workers, agriculture workers, and then something that might be new to some of you is the fact that there is a high rate of farmer suicide, both in the United States and abroad, because of all of the challenges that they face. And then there's this very interesting paradox of being overweight. We know that we have an increased incidence of being overweight and obese in the United States, but then simultaneously being undernourished. And that's because we have abundant calories in the form of refined grains, sugars, high fructose corn syrup, oils, and fast food. And those calories really have very few nutrients. So what ends up happening is that there's an inadequate intake of iron, calcium, magnesium, zinc, copper, folate, and a couple of other vitamins. And as emphasized before, those phytonutrients aren't going to be in those compounds. And then this is associated with the development of insulin resistance, which then contributes to fat accumulation and this sort of cycle of weight gain and being undernourished and then chronic disease. And all of that is associated with food insecurity, which is a really important topic in the United States. And then there's some direct health impacts of our current agriculture practices. So our current agriculture practices damage the soil, and that damaged soil then has fewer nutrients and fewer phytochemicals and nutrients that can be pulled up into the plants that we eat. Phosphate fertilizers are associated with decreasing the amounts of calcium and magnesium that are in plants. And then there's glyphosate. And so glyphosate is the compound that's found in Roundup. And Roundup is ubiquitous. It is a herbicide that is used both in agriculture and on people's lawns. And this is associated with decreased uptake into minerals as well. It changes the bacteria in our gut microbiome if you consume foods with a glyphosate residue. It's associated with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in farmers and applicators of Roundup, and there are several lawsuits related to that. It's considered a probable carcinogen, and it's associated with liver and kidney damage in rat models. And I think that this is the impact of glyphosate on human health. We're just starting to understand that.
So there are consequences of the complicated food system that we alluded to before on the planet. Soil erosion, nutrient depletion from overplanting. As we have evolved into a global food system, we have produced more food in ways that deplete the soil and nutrients from the soil, overplanting, and in order to accumulate more income from commodity crops. Our current food system is responsible for 1/3 of the global greenhouse emissions. Water pollution from chemical and manure runoff has become huge problems. We hear about it in the state of Vermont with the pollution of Lake Champlain. Monocropping, which means raising large amounts of single crops in an area like soy, wheat, corn, other grains, increase plant diseases in those large areas and insect problems, and reduce overall plant and insect biodiversity. That has resulted in the decline of the world pollinator population, which at some point will come back to bite us because pollinators are responsible for keeping our food system going. Government programs to address these problems, and there are many to address pollution, have yet to address the root causes of the problems. So you've probably heard about genetically modified organisms, GMOs. Our government does not yet allow for the labeling of genetically modified organisms. Farmers and processors need to instead label their products as free of them, if they happen to be free of them. It involves science of inserting a gene from one organism into another. It's a questionable practice. As a Indian scientist, Vandana Shiva has been on the vanguard of fighting genetically modified organisms, saying that you can't insert a gene you took from a bacteria into a seed and call it life. You've not created life, instead you have polluted it. Genetic engineering has never been about saving the world, it's about controlling the world. It really has to my mind, as a farmer, an organic farmer, it has no role except to create huge profits for the companies, particularly Monsanto, now called Bayer, that has paid for it, has huge investments in creating GMOs. So how did we get to this point where we have a food system that does not serve the planet or our own human health? We do have a long history of both colonialism and capitalism that's resulted in separating producers from the consumers of food. So the little simple pie that we looked at before that had producers and consumers very much being the same people. You would grow your own garden, basically. That still exists, but it's not the basis of our food system now. This has been considered progress freeing up people from not having to do the drudgery of raising their food. Certainly since the Industrial Revolution started, that has been the goal. Free up people from that burden of raising the food. However, it has resulted in the loss of food sovereignty, meaning people having control over the food that they eat. In the early 20th century, over 40% of Americans lived on farms. Currently, about 1% live on farms. This means that many people have lost any conception of what it means to raise their food. It is at this point extremely profitable for some individuals and some corporations to grow, process, and sell our food products, some of which are barely food. So we have called this, since the 1920s, the cheap food policy, which meant that the government started to subsidize some crops, commodity crops, they're called, in order to keep food cheap for the people that were now working in factories. They would not be raising their own food, so there had to be a system for people to get food in an inexpensive way. Since the 1950s, US food policy has reflected what Earl Butz, the Secretary of Agriculture under President Nixon, said, which was to get big or get out. He advised farmers to plant fence row to stay profitable and to combat world hunger. So without any controls on production, the results have been lower prices to farmers and fewer and larger farmers. The economic pressure on the remaining farmers is intense. You can look at the Vermont dairy industry as an example. When my husband and I started dairy farming in 1979, there were over 4,000 dairy farms. There are now barely over 600 dairy farms. This is something that's been repeated all over the country. Commodity crops are ones that can be easily monetized and are encouraged by subsidies. The result is overproduction of a few crops, the use of chemical pesticides and fertilizers to increase that production, and without any controls on production, there are resulting lower prices to the farmers themselves, plus soil and human health consequences. Corn is an example that everybody is familiar with. You think of those beautiful ears of corn. They can be people food, true, but they can also be animal food. Huge feedlots are based on feeding corn to cows that really don't digest corn very well. They're meant to digest forages, hay, and grass. Corn can also be made into junk food. And whether it's organic or not, a corn puff is still junk food. Can also be made into sweetener. The high fructose corn syrup has appeared in all sorts of foods that you wouldn't expect, and is certainly linked to the obesity epidemic. It can be made into oils that we don't really need. We have plenty of other naturally occurring oils, and it can be made into gasoline in the form of ethanol. So these plates show you the current dietary recommendation of the government that shows, again, a nice simple pie, even fruits, grains, proteins, vegetables, with fruits and vegetables being 50% of that plate. And then we see the agricultural subsidies, and they don't match the foods that even our government tells us are healthy for us to eat. Corn, which we saw can be made into many non-food products, gets the lion's share of the subsidies.
And then it's important to consider the cost of food, and calories are cheap, but something that we're really trying to emphasize is quality and the quality of your food choices. And sometimes quality costs more, but I would argue that there are a lot of hidden costs, more than you think, for our cheap food, including the cost of environmental pollution that we're not bearing, biodiversity loss, mining of soil and water, an increase in the cost of healthcare as people are getting sicker, the farm support payments, and then there's the support that's needed to be given to families who are working in the food system, who are food system workers that are making less than a living wage. So what to do? So I think that one way to think about our choices and how we can make choices that help our health and our planet is this planet-focused continuum, plant-focused continuum of choice. So just starting out by eating more plants, more fruits and vegetables and plant proteins, and less processed food is a really good step in the right direction to improving your health and the planet's health. But there's additional things that you can do, like choosing organic and choosing local and organic if possible, because with the local aspect, the money stays in the community and food doesn't have to be transported as far. And then we're moving into a state where we really want to have our food and agriculture system be regenerative and to have methods, to use methods that can help to reverse climate change and provides fair wages to workers. So some of the health benefits, human health benefits of moving in this in this direction has to do with the vitamins and minerals and nutrients that we are consuming. So in terms of organic food compared to conventionally grown food, there are more minerals in organically grown food. They have a higher phytonutrient content in the fruits and vegetables that we consume. And again, those phytonutrients are really important for health. And animal products that are grown in an organic manner have a higher content of omega-3 fatty acids compared to conventionally grown products. And we know that omega-3 fatty acids have heart benefits, but also some cancer benefits. Organic food has no GMO allowed, and as a result, there's going to be lower pesticide residue. And local might even be more nutritious in terms of nutrient content, because if you look at the vitamin C content in locally grown broccoli compared to organic, there's more in the locally or grown broccoli than the organic, and then more in both the locally grown and organic than in conventionally grown broccoli. So definitely some human health benefits.
There are also benefits to our environment, to the planet, from eating food, choosing foods that are farmed organically. Organic agriculture is the most regulated type of agriculture at this point. I think maybe dairy might be second, but even conventional dairy. But there are rigorous inspections. And although there have been reports of mistrust of, it's sort of like the voter fraud discussion. There perhaps are some farming frauds in organic agriculture, but by and large, it's very rigorously inspected. Synthetic pesticides and fertilizers are not allowed. GMOs are not allowed. Animal welfare is strictly enforced. Crop rotation and soil improvement practices are required. And regulations that lead to worker protection from any sprays and from poor working conditions are also required. Vandana Shiva said, the organic farmer is the best peacemaker today. There are potential issues, certainly that you will hear about. Organic crops can be grown in a monocrop system. There is organic soy, there is organic almonds, there are organic corn, wheat that are grown in huge farms that do not encourage biodiversity. So that is a potential difficulty. There are certainly in the area of, say, small fruit, there are the Driscoll company monopolizes the small fruit production. And within, this is a quote from Marion Nestle, the organic junk food is still junk food. So just because something is labeled organic does not necessarily mean that it will be good for you.
So what about animal products? So I happen to eat meat. I grew up on a ranch in North Dakota, and Eugenie has elected not to. So there are a lot of reasons why people might make those choices. Is it needed for health? No, not absolutely necessary for health. You don't need to include animal products to be healthy. B12, vitamin B12 is necessary as a supplement on a vegan diet, but it's certainly not very hard to get vitamin B12. And then in terms of the planet, is are animal products destructive or helpful? So there's aspects on both sides. It definitely takes more land to raise animals than it does plants. And currently, animals are eating large amounts of grain, but they're really not meant to. Animals were meant to forage and eat grasses, and these are all foods that they can use very well because of their digestive system and can get changed into protein that we are then able to digest easily. Animals can use land that's not useful for growing plants where they can forage. And then as a result, they are efficient converters of plants to protein and fertilizer. But there's obviously an ethical issue that everybody needs to make their own decisions regarding the ethics of consuming animal products. So animal products or animals are often kept in really close quarters in non-organic situations. And if you're keeping animals in really close quarters like that, you're going to increase infection and end up using more antibiotics as a result. And it's really stressful for animals, and so they don't grow as well. And so then there's often some growth stimulants used as well. And then there's the problem of animal waste in those very, very concentrated situations. And then questionable slaughter practices as well, both for the animals and for the individuals working in slaughter plants. So I think it's really, if one elects to consume animal products, that you should really consider sort of the location. So are you living in an area where it makes sense to have animal products, like I did growing up in the middle of North Dakota, where the buffalo were roaming most of the time. And then when it comes to meat and animal products, quality is really key. So meaning that where it comes from is critically important, and looking at whether something is organic and local, preferably. And this picture is actually an example of a rotational grazing system, which is how animals would proceed in the past. So animals would move from place to place. They would poop and pee in that area, and that adds to the fertilization of the land, and then they move on. And so they have the potential for actually helping to draw down carbon. And in our resource section in the back, there is a really good site about called Good Meat, and it's a good option to look at if you're interested in choosing animal products that are healthy and sustainable and good for the planet and people.
So the term, you may have heard, regenerative agriculture, refers not necessarily to a certified organic program, but to a philosophy that reflects the awareness that we not only have to sustain the production of food that we have, but we have work to do. We have work to repair the damage that is done. The goal of this newly labeled regenerative agriculture is to restore soil to the micronutrients that should be there, to draw down carbon, to conserve water, and to create and support biodiversity, to make farmers, and the consumers more resilient to climate change and more resilient to other sorts of adverse world effects like the pandemic that we've just lived through. The term regenerative agriculture at this point is currently unlabeled and unregulated. There's no sort of technical Department of Regenerative Agriculture. There's no regenerative agriculture program at a national level. So at this point, the labels that reflect in your food that reflect this philosophy would be certified organic, USDA organic, and a new label called the Real Organic that seeks to really stress the importance of soil.
So this is what a diet might look like that supports a regenerative food and agriculture system. And this is from an interesting report put out in one of our common medical journals called Lancet, a commission that was put together to look at agriculture and food. And if you look at that plate, the vast majority of that plate is plant food. So the fruits and the vegetables and unsaturated plant oils and plant source proteins like legumes and whole grains. And you'll see that there are animal products listed there and dairy foods. And again, it's important to sort of think about what locale you're at and what kind of food can most sustainably be produced in those areas. And then the other pictures just sort of represented food and the amount. And you see that it looks like a really healthy looking diet with lots of plant proteins. So sort of to start to concluding, I think there's some really positive examples for directions that we're moving to improve human health, but also to improve the health of the planet. There are more and more what are called food pharmacies showing up. So Geisinger, which is in the Pennsylvania area, that health system gives patients $2,400 in fruits and vegetables. And what they find is that since 2015, since they started the program, that they've actually seen a $1.5 million healthcare savings as they help individuals with diabetes choose more quality foods. And that's going to result in requiring fewer medications, fewer hospitalizations. At the University of Vermont Medical Center and Central Vermont Medical Center, we have a healthcare share program also where individuals can get boxes of fruits and vegetables. There's a large urban agriculture movement to really address those food deserts where the only options for food is a bodega down the street, and there's no place where you're going to be able to find fresh fruits and vegetables. And at the University of Vermont and the University of Vermont Medical Center, we actually are in the second year of a garden program that teaches individuals how to garden, which is a really exciting program. And this is the first year that there is a group of individuals with cancer participating in that program. And then there is a program from the U.S. Department of Agriculture essentially called it's called Double Up Food Bucks. In Vermont, it's called Crop Cash. And in this program, individuals who participate in SNAP or food stamps, the amount that they get is actually doubled if that is spent at participating farmers markets and grocery stores. And then the Vermont Department of Health also has farm to family coupons to help with consuming more fruits and vegetables.
So what to do? As we sum up, we've described a lot of problems, but I think you can look at it as a very positive program of taking steps that are going to heal both us and the planet. It's like when we were diagnosed with cancer or any other chronic disease, when we're in treatment, we just realize we have work to do and we double down and do it. And in this case, it can be quite a joyful process, I think, to eat organic food, eat locally when possible, meet your farmer if possible, grow your own food if possible, and skip using the Roundup or any other pesticide that's costly and going to harm your health. Eat more plants. Plants are relatively inexpensive. Organic carrots don't cost any more than conventional carrots. Replace processed food with plants. That's also a way of cutting costs. An ear of corn is a lot cheaper than those corn chips that we were talking about. Eat plants in season and recognize what makes you feel good. Also recognize that good food, while it will not guarantee good health, will make you feel better. Even your mental health, eating food that gives you pleasure and gives you beauty will make you feel better.
So I think it's important to think about reconnecting. So reconnect with the land and the people who grow your food. So visit a pick your own farm. and meet your farmer and plant a garden, even if it's just a few pots with some tomatoes or some herbs. It's a great way to connect to the soil and the environment and reconnect with real food. You can do that at farmers markets and through community supported agriculture options. Purchase local food, and there are some larger supermarkets in the Vermont area that do purchase, that do provide local food as options. And then there are food co-ops and health food stores that also support local farmers and provide locally grown fruits and vegetables. And then reconnect with cooking and eating with others and connecting through food at the table. So we'd like to thank you for participating in this program with us. And we have a few resources here at the back. If you are interested in what the certification programs look like, there are some websites that are listed here. A dietitian who focuses on plants and sustainability, and then the Good Meat program, which I mentioned before, and a program that you all probably are familiar with, which is the Environmental Working Group that lists the information about the Dirty Dozen, so the fruits and vegetables that where you really should think about consuming organic. And then there's several books that are good options. And the last few years, there's been so many really good documentaries about health in the food system, and then more recently on regenerative agriculture. And I know that those of you who are participating are also athletes. And so there's a really interesting documentary called Game Changers based on a plant-based diet for athletes. So I hope you've learned some information about how you can help your health and the planet. And we really, really enjoyed doing this for you.